What is up? Welcome back to the Blue Star Lunch Hour. We are live. I'm Joey Ikes. That's John Owning. We're going to see John's house here for the
Yeah,
next few minutes.
the lights are
There you
pretty
go.
out here
Windows
today.
are killing you. Where's John going to wind up? I joked with John last week we are going to add a "Where's John streaming from" today
Oh, we got
and
we got more.
to
Wait
the
till the
channel.
summer hits. Wait till
There
the
you
summer hits and the outside is
there
available.
there you go. There you go. All right, guys. Today we are going to talk about what else? The Cowboys had some stuff happen this weekend. We've been waiting for stuff to happen for this team for months, it feels like,
Yeah.
and we had some stuff happen over the weekend, and we covered the Tyler Guyton pick relatively well on Friday, but today we're here to talk about the rest of the draft class, and we'll start with the second round pick. And so just to recap, the Cowboys traded back from the 24th to the 29th overall pick. They selected Tyler Guyton with the 29th overall pick, and that gives they in return for the trade, they received the 73rd overall pick from the Lions. It traded up. I'm blanking here because I'm trying to cover all the picks here. They picked 29th overall and picked Tyler Guyton. And then they came back around at the 56th overall pick. And John, they went right into your backyard and picked an edge rusher, Marshon Kneeland from Western Michigan. I had to make sure I got the right directional Michigan school because I've missed those up a few times. Not a ton of production in 2023, 4.5 sacks, 7.5 tackles for loss, but is a guy that a lot of draft folks really, really liked a lot coming into the process. What was your take on Marshon Kneeland coming into the process, and how do you feel about him being the 56th overall pick for the Cowboys?
Well, first of all, we talk about the lack of production in the sense that he was lacking sacks, but if you look at him from like a play-by-play basis, especially pass rush win rate, he was one of the highest in the class. He had a 20+% pass rush win rate, which even against a smaller school schedule is still really, really good. And you saw him win in ways that are going to translate well to the NFL. I think his biggest problem in college was that he was kind of lacking in a pass rush plan, and he would get kind of siloed into what he was kind of his pass rush plan he was wanting to do. It was basically power or nothing. One of our good friends, John Ledyard, had a good quote during the draft process that if you've seen one Marshon Kneeland pass rush, you've seen them all. And that's kind of true because they do start looking really, really similar to each other because he's just constantly just carpet bombing opposing offensive lines with power, with bull rushes, long arms, 2-to-1 bull rushes, all those type of things. And that allowed, I think that is the biggest reason why that his sack production was limited, because when you're constantly having to basically run through the opposing offensive line, it's hard to get there in time, especially with how quick they get the ball out these days in college and in the NFL. So I think that's something that limited his sack production. But once we got to the Senior Bowl and the NFL Combine, we started to see someone who had a much bigger repertoire of moves available to him that he just didn't use. We saw him at the Combine. He was one of the more athletic edge defenders, especially testing well in the short shuttle and 3-cone drills, which is fantastic to see because those are the drills that I would say, along with the 10-yard split, that translate the most to edge defender play in the NFL. And in the Senior Bowl, you saw him get a lot more high side wins than he did during the season. Like I said, during the season, he was kind of playing through contact, but we saw him the ability to win with bend, to win with cornering ability, to show that speed, to show that short area burst, that quickness, that lower body flexibility to be able to run a corner. He's not the type of person with the hip flexibility to drop low and run under a table like a TJ Watt or a Micah Parsons or a Von Miller, but he has the ability to corner and win high side, which is great to see. And once he starts getting people to really respect that high side rush, you're going to see a lot of inside counters be more successful, because the way in college that he won with his inside counters mostly was when he would be rushing with power. And then once he got to the level of the quarterback, what he would do a lot of times is he would either do a long arm shot put, which is where you just use your long arm move to just shot put him by, or he would do a influence spin back into the pocket. And both of those were pretty successful for him during college. And I think in the NFL, they're going to be even more successful because he's going to hopefully start incorporating those high side rushes and gain more respect that way. And that's just going to open up that interior B gap rush way more often.
There you go. Yeah, I think, you've seen I have, and I don't know if you've made this comp, but I've seen the comp of comparing him to kind of a young, raw version of DeMarcus Lawrence, where he's gonna win in a lot of the same ways, the violence, the intensity, all that kind of stuff on the rush. That's the way that he's gonna win on the edge, and he's going to be a guy who's going to contribute against the run probably a lot sooner than he's going to contribute high value snaps against the pass as a true edge rusher. Like you said, it was nice watching the Senior Bowl stuff to see him win. You'll use high side, I'll use outside, right? Yeah, I'll translate a little bit. To see him win outside through the outside half of the tackle rather than winning through the middle or the inside of the tackle. Because like you said, on tape or when you watch him play in games, on tape kind of always sounds a little I don't know,
pretentious.
Pretentious, uppity to me, because that's what guys who used to gatekeep this stuff would do to us before we had access to a lot of it. So when you watch the guy play in game, you do see a lot of down the middle, like he's just going to try to run right through guys. And to a certain extent, when you're playing at Western Michigan and you're that kind of athlete, you can get away with it to a certain extent that way. But when you get to the Senior Bowl level and you're playing against a little bit higher level of competition, then you get to the NFL, you're playing a lot higher level of competition. You kind of have to be able to have more tricks in your bag. And luckily for him, he's almost exactly what you think of when you think of a Mike Zimmer edge rusher, right? Like north of 260, between that 260, 270 type range, tall, long, athletic. And he and DeMarcus, if he just like puts a carabiner on DeMarcus Lawrence's belt loop and just like walks around behind him for the next year, I think he's going to be in great shape rolling into 2025. After he'll contribute in 2024 for sure, but I kind of hold the view on pretty much all edge picks that this is a 2-year type of process where you wind up with, you're going to get some play and some production out of them as rookies, but really the big step comes in year 2 once they've had a chance to see what offensive tackles in the NFL are going to try to do to them.
Yeah, and I think I've seen a lot of pushback with the D-Law comp because they see D-Law and they say, he's this masterful technician with his hands. His ability to parry strikes is really what gives him the ability to consistently win as a pass rush. I mean, at this later stage where he's not as athletic as he was as a youngster, he's winning with basically pure technique, ability to sense weight distribution, those type of, experience kind of guile moves that you see the really experienced rushers in the NFL succeed. And that's not really what Kneeland does. But if you remember, like you said, the raw, early, young D-Law, the guy who was winning with, power, arm over exits, violence, just pure hustle, work ethic. Marshon Kneeland fits a lot of those same things. And like D-Law, he has the ability to expand his repertoire and win in a variety of different ways. He just hasn't gotten to that point yet where he's either confident enough with those moves or that he's just put in the time and put in the reps necessary to be able to replicate those moves in a game situation.
Yeah, right. And he's lucky enough to have, the guy who's 8 to 10 years out in front of him in this or I guess exactly 10 years ago. Wow, that makes me feel old that he was drafted in 2014 and I remember that draft so well. But he's got a guy who's 10 years out in front of him in the process, who came in as a similar type player, 2nd round pick, smaller school, all that kind of stuff, and has developed in the career and had the career he's had. Like I said, just put a carabiner on that back pocket and just follow him around like a puppy for the next year.
Can you think of a better anybody in the NFL would be a better mentor for Marshon Kneeland and the type of player you want him to develop into than DeMarcus Lawrence? I think it just fits it like almost perfectly to a T.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And I think that's part, and, we hear, you hear Brian Broaddus, who was in the draft room with Jerry Jones, talk about how if you can compare a college player to somebody that Jerry Jones knows, it helps him see the player and see the vision for the player. I wouldn't be shocked if some of these guys dropped a DeMarcus Lawrence comp for him. Like the high end outcome for Marshon Kneeland is what DeMarcus Lawrence has been for us for the last 5 years. And I think that's a pretty darn good outcome for him for sure. So then we get to the bonus pick, and we'll joke that we manifested this pick. We talked about this pick before the draft. We talked about it as they were drafting. We talked about it. We picked him in our mock draft we did before the draft. We picked him. We talked about him on our show after the first round. The Cowboys go draft Cooper Beebe, the interior offensive lineman, we'll call him. I think he's going to play center for the Cowboys with the 73rd overall pick from Kansas State. And I'll just, one of the most impressive things I've seen on tape from a college player was, I can't even remember the game that it was off the top of my head, but there was a game where Cooper Beebe started at left guard, played like half the first half at left guard, then jumped out to right tackle because the right tackle got hurt, played 2 or 3 series at right tackle. Then the right tackle comes back, so Cooper Beebe goes back to left guard, all within the first half, and then jumps back out to right tackle again a couple more times in the second half as their right tackle was kind of fighting in-game injury. And you just think about, not only is like a completely different level of assignment because of the guard tackle thing, like the blocks are different all the run game. And K-State was like, all right, we're going to drop back and Cooper Beebe's going to be the right tackle and he's going to be one-on-one on a defensive end. Like, we're not helping him. He's going to be out there on his own. He's been playing guard for us all year. He's going to move out there and we're going to leave him on his own. But the footwork, flip back and forth, all that stuff, like, you see that, it's so impressive. And then you see the power that he plays with, the way he plays against the run. He's such a smart player. It just feels like that is kind of the pick. And we talked about this, like, if you're going to take the tackle early, you got a chance to come back and get a center that can kind of make everything fit. And it feels like that's really what the Cooper Beebe pick was. And when you say, okay, we dropped back 5 spots and missed out on Graham Barton, but in return for Graham Barton, we turned the 24th pick into Tyler Guyton and Cooper Beebe, that's pretty darn good for me. I'll take that pretty much every day.
Yeah, 100%. I think the day 2 picks made the day 1 pick a lot more palatable. Made it fit a lot more in the grand scheme. I know we talked about my kind of misgivings about the first round pick and how I wasn't as high on it as other people. Not to say that I think he's going to be bad or anything, just that might have not been the direction that I would have went. But when you combine him with what we saw that they got from Kneeland and then they got Cooper Beebe, I think it fit really well. And things, that's one of the best, top 3 picks I think that you can kind of point out at each spot. If you looked at who was available at each pick, I think it's one of the best things. And I think Cooper Beebe, he gives me a lot of Zach Martin vibes, to be honest. I don't want to get people's hopes up and say he's going to be Zach Martin, the best offensive lineman in the NFL for the last decade, obvious first ballot Hall of Famer type. I don't think he's going to be that, but he gives me a lot of those same vibes, the ability, to be able to switch in position in game, like we saw with Zach Martin, and not look like he missed a beat, to be able to function there and not look like he's totally out of bits. Just when you hear him talk, he seems to have like that calm, real, like, confident nature that a Zach Martin has. He's not like a super fiery person, I would say, per se, but he has just that quiet confidence that kind of like the Cowboys offensive line has really had dating back to, the Kyle Kozier, when Zach Martin first got there, Doug Free, that kind of type of offensive lineman. He really gives me those. And like we said on the draft before, I think he just fits in really well as a center. I think he solidifies the group up front. I think he's going to be the best center that they've had since Travis Frederick. And I'm just a solid, extremely solid player who can do it a lot. Opens up a lot of different things you can do. He's incredibly intelligent. You hear Duke Manyweather talk about him, who worked with him. He's one of the smartest guys that he worked with, from a X's and O's, from a being able to identify blitzes, from being able to move protections and stuff like that. Duke Manyweather was talking about how throughout the process, they kind of made a switch, and because they started seeing teams give him interest in playing center, so they started giving him like center, like mental quizzes and stuff, and he was just performing extremely well in those, and that just gave them the confidence that if he has to make a full switch here, he's going to be able to do it easily, and the transition is going to be seamless.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I brought up that tape where you see him flipping positions back and forth 2 or 3 times. is like, if you can handle that, and like the visual keys that you're using as a left guard are completely different than the ones you're using as a right tackle. They're like the assignments. A lot of the blocks can be the same. You know, a reach block going to your left is relatively similar as a guard versus a tackle. You know, a cutoff block going to your left or your right, whatever, is relatively similar. But the idea that you're doing it on opposite sides of the field within the same game is like, I don't want to say mind-blowing, but it's one of those things that very, very few people can do. There's a reason why almost nobody plays guard and tackle in an NFL game, especially on opposite sides. It's just a really incredibly difficult assignment. And I pulled up here Cooper Beebe's relative athletic score. And if you guys are watching this show, you're probably relatively familiar with the relative athletic score. Kinley Platt at MathBomb on Twitter, which it will always be Twitter, puts the composite athleticism scores together. And this was something that, I don't know about you, it surprised me a little bit to see Cooper Beebe test as an athlete as well as he did. Because when you watch him on tape, like, he moves relatively well, but I guess it's relatively similar to like Zach Martin. Like, you look at him play and you wouldn't say, oh, this guy's a really incredible athlete, but he's a pretty good tested athlete also. But the 10 split, the shuttle, the 3-cone, like, these things are unbelievably high level for a guy at 322 pounds. And it's funny, the bench is the one thing that he kind of, I guess you could say, has control over that's not really high end. Travis Frederick also had a really poor bench, but he had like a 375, almost 400 pound power clean.
Yeah, I was gonna say the bench means like
almost nothing.
Little to
exactly.
Blocking that I don't even know why they do it. Every time I see somebody be like, "Oh, he hit 30 reps," it shows his play strength. It's like, you're an idiot. Thanks.
Yeah, all it shows is it shows a little bit. It's funny. It shows almost more like aerobic capacity stamina than it does strength, just to be able to breathe through a bunch of reps like that. But I mean, if my center can
points to work ethic, like he worked hard enough to get to the point where he could hit 30 reps. Like that.
Exactly, which translate nothing towards high end strength. But like I said, Travis Frederick had a massive power clean, up in the neighborhood of 375 or 400 pounds. Nate Tice talked about it. He played at Wisconsin with Travis Frederick. I was talking about that a couple of weeks ago on their podcast. And I would not be shocked if Cooper Beebe's one of those guys with one of those sky-high power clean type. And you see it with the broad jump, the shuttle, the 10-yard split. Like, he has all of the athleticism that you need to play in the middle of an offense. And combine that with the power and the nasty, and want to, as in his words, he just wants to dirt guys on every snap, which is exactly the philosophy that I want for my center playing between Tyler Smith and Zach Martin. And so that to me was kind of the pick that kind of put the bow on it. Really, the whole draft is like, I kind of have the personal philosophy. I share it with, I stole it from Justice Mosqueda, that the draft ends after the 4th round. And
especially
the draft
this year,
especially
this year with how the junior class was so diminished because of the NIL rules, giving some college players a little bit more of an ability to stay in college a year or two longer. The junior class was almost wiped out. Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl was talking about it, all throughout the process, about how, day 3 is going to be not as many good prospects as it has in the past. The UDFA classes are going to be pillaged. They're not going to be. And I think we saw that with the Cowboys UDFA class, outside of, I'm sure we'll get into it, but Brevin Spanford, I'm not really a big fan of really anybody that they signed.
Yeah, there just wasn't much. And it's a combination of the NIL encouraging the 3rd-year player to come back.
Yeah.
But also, this is the last year of the special COVID exemption, where guys could take the extra year of eligibility. And so if you are a guy who's going to get picked in the 5th round or something like that, and you are a senior, and we saw Anaya Smith did this last year. A guy wound up going to the Eagles, of course, goes to A&M, went to A&M. He could have he got hurt in what was his true senior year, his 4th season, got hurt and missed the whole second half of the season. He could have come out, been a late round pick, been an undrafted free agent, come to the league. But instead, he chose to stay at A&M, where he, had a massive reputation, had been a really good player for a long time. Chose to stay at A&M for the extra year, was probably able to get as much in guaranteed NIL money as he would have gotten guaranteed as a 6th, 7th round pick or an undrafted free agent. chose to come back and, wound up getting drafted, had a healthy year this year, got drafted, all that kind of stuff. That COVID exception to allow guys to come back for a fifth year without a red shirt is gone after this past college football season. So the 2024 draft now will not have fifth-year players, fourth-year players, third-year players eligible to come out. It will have those fourth-year guys will have to come out this year. They won't have the option of going back for the fourth year. So it should stack up a lot of those guys. That junior class you're talking about will all be through their fourth year and will now be out of eligibility, assuming that they didn't redshirt, and they'll be able to come out. It'll be deeper in 2025. But, yeah, if the draft ends after the fourth round and you don't have a fourth-round pick, we're going to get to the other third-round pick here coming up. But once you draft Cooper Beebe and you combine him with Tyler Guyton and you have Marshon Kneeland, it kind of puts a bow on what, for me, felt like a really solid first 2 days, even if they didn't have the extra pick that they wound up taking a little bit later.
Yeah, I totally agree. I was really happy the way it worked out. And we keep going back to it, but I really think that trade back in the first round really set the table for the Cowboys to I don't want to say they knocked the first 2 days out of the park, but the fact that they hit like a really solid, double, triple, whatever baseball term you want to use. But I feel like it just really set the table for them to have a successful draft.
Yeah, absolutely. And so now we get to the second third-round pick, and that is, and I'm probably going to butcher his name. I will learn it over the course of the next few weeks and months as we get there. Marist Liufau, who is a linebacker from Notre Dame, and he was a guy who, and I think I mentioned it to you in a DM right after the pick was made. I didn't know what a Marist Liufau was when they made the pick. I hadn't watched a lot of Notre Dame football the prior year, hadn't really studied the Notre Dame defense for any reason coming into the draft. So I wasn't familiar with Marist. Did you have a take coming into the draft on him as a player, on kind of how he would fit, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, he's an interesting player. He's a very energetic player. He's a very I know that the Cowboys scout Ross Winesky comped him to a kind of Talanoa Hufanga type from the 49ers safety, kind of that energetic, big hitter type. And that's what Marist Liufau is. But Liufau, not Hufanga, sorry. But,
combine the two, right?
But the thing that's interesting about Marist is you see people, most of the issues that college linebackers have, especially in the terms of like keen diagnosing and instincts, is they're usually a step slow. They wait to read things out, and then it takes them a second to move off their spot. So then they're a step slow. So then they have to make up for it. And that puts the angles all off. It just kind of messes with the run fits a little bit. And you saw the Cowboys having big issues with that with Damone Clark, who was a step slow throughout the season last year. But Liufau, he almost is like a step too fast. Like he almost reacts too much to the initial, whatever his initial stimuli is. He kind of almost overreacts to things too quickly. And that causes him to the same end result, as in he's not getting to his run fits as efficiently as you should be, as you see a guy like maybe like a Peyton Wilson will in the same draft class. But he's almost too quick. He's almost like, I think you said it in the DMs about how simplifying his keys a little bit might allow him to play a little bit more efficiently and get to a spot better. And I don't want to say quicker, because he is quick to do everything, but he's almost too quick. So you need him to be a little bit more patient, which is weird to say for a linebacker, as I said in college. But he kind of does need that. And I think simplifying his reads and that's what I think Zim's going to do in his scheme. I think you're going to see him get the most out of what a Liufau type of linebacker can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that he's an interesting player. I'm going to steal some terminology from our buddy Landon McCool.
Yes.
There's different kinds of linebackers, right? And you see like run and hit, read and react. I think Liufau Marist is a point and shoot linebacker.
Yeah.
Where he's like you're going to take the B gap, or you're going to cover this guy in man coverage. And those are like, from a coverage standpoint, and I would have pulled it. I pulled it up before the end of the draft, but I'm not going to look at it now because we're sitting here looking at other stuff. But the man coverage stuff from PFF on a per snap basis was fantastic for Marist when I looked at it during the draft. And so if you think about, I kind of envisioned him like he's probably a third down player in a Mike Zimmer defense, which is like a crazy exotic, like lots of funky looks, crazy converted coverages and all this kind of stuff. Lots of man and man match coverages coming out of weird looks at the line of scrimmage where the offensive line and the quarterback have to diagnose who's coming, who's dropping, who's got everybody. And if you put Marist in the A gap, sugared up there on 3rd and 12 or 3rd and 8 with the rest of the guys around him, and you say, okay, you're either coming in this A gap, you're setting up the stunt, you're gonna pierce so that Osa can loop around you, or vice versa, or whatever, and you put him on one of those assignments as a penetrating player. We've seen him be very productive in that type of assignment at Notre Dame. And then we've also seen him be very good in coverage whenever he's got a true, like, hey, this is your guy, go cover that guy assignment. And he seems relatively aware in match type coverages. It's kind of hard to tell how much of that kind of stuff they're playing, but you see him occasionally when he'll take and turn and drop, and he'll put eyes on number 2. And then if number 2 goes vertical, you'll see his eyes move the number 1. And so like you see him make those kinds of read and react type plays and coverage. But I do think there's some of that reaction stuff whenever you're talking about run fits, like you mentioned, where the timing's just off a little bit. He'll be early. And I think the Hufanga comparison is great because it's just that kind of chaotic energy that's just out trying to make a play on every single play. And to be honest, I kind of don't hate that at the linebacker spot of just like, I'm just going to go run and mess stuff up. And if I mess stuff up, there's a lot of players around me who can make plays with me.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think he's going to be an interesting fit in the Cowboys defense. And like you said, on 3rd down, Zim likes to get wild on 3rd downs. He likes to get really exotic with his coverages, with his coverage rotations. A lot of time his disguises, his, he dresses up simplicity with complexity, pre-snap on 3rd downs a lot. So you see it looks, got all these moving parts, these linebackers sugared in the A gap. You might see a 1 high shell that rotates to a 2 high shell, all these different type of things. And I think Liufau really fits in that because he is someone who, like you said, kind of point and shoot, sugar the A gap and then drop and relate to the running back or relate to the first to the flats, whatever you want to do coverage wise, he can do that from a short to intermediate coverage standpoint. And then just against the run fits, it's going to be interesting. The thing that is going to worry me a little bit is, you look at the Cowboys depth chart of defensive tackle and it's still not great. Still doesn't look good. And the ability to keep the linebackers clean is going to be especially important with a guy like Liufau, I think, because I don't think he's going to be getting off much block. So if the Cowboys defensive tackles can't at least slow those blocks climbing from the second level, if they're just springing to the second level unencumbered like we've been seeing the last 2 or 3 years, it's going to be struggle city for Liufau. And we're going to see people, lamenting another Cowboys linebacker pick, but it's not really his fault. It's because the guys in front of him aren't doing their jobs.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
There's one little trait thing that I really liked about Liufau that I think is a small detail, but I think it just kind of indicates his broader skill set. Is I love when he's approaching running backs and he knows that stiff arm is coming. You always see him chop the stiff arm down before he wraps and makes the tackle. And that's something you don't see a lot of, especially college linebackers make. That's kind of more of a more experienced players kind of trait or skill. And he does it consistently. And that just kind of makes me think that has the aptitude and the ability to learn more and take on greater and different techniques that may be necessary in the NFL. He's going to be able to translate.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a very interesting player that, like I said, I had never seen him play before before they made the pick. So it was cool. It's always fun for me. It's almost more fun to study these guys after the draft than it is to study them before the draft, just because there's so many guys. And then when I get the chance to just really narrow in on a guy that the Cowboys pick and really run through my mind, okay, how does this guy really fit with what they're doing? What are they thinking? What's the role here? He really feels like almost exclusively a 3rd down player early in his career. because of that, what you were talking about. He's not going to be a guy that gets off a bunch of blocks in the run game. He's got some questions with timing and things like that. And another thing that he did really well that you saw him when he played against USC, he's a really good spy on mobile quarterbacks and quarterbacks that want to escape. So when you get against these guys that, it's all over the league, these guys that get out of the pocket and make plays. They have a couple of them in their own division. Really, basically all three of the quarterbacks in their division now are guys that like to run around and kind of get chaotic with the game. A guy like Liufau on third down, sitting in the middle of the defense with all the chaos that the defensive line could produce in pass rush situations, with him ready to insert as a spy when one of those guys breaks the pocket, that's really intriguing for me as kind of thinking through the defensive scheme stuff and how they're going to play things up on third down when they try to get these stops or in these 2-minute situations whenever teams are trying to drive down, and you kind of got to simplify things a little bit from a coverage standpoint. But you put Liufau out there and let him kind of play spy. We've seen them do this with like C.J. Goodwin before, like back in the day. They would let him play just because the speed sideline to sideline and the ability to make tackles was really valuable in those situations. And I think they'll be able to do the same type of thing with him in those type of third down situations.
And you talk about C.J. Goodwin, guy who makes his living on special teams. I think Liufau is going to be a phenomenal special teamer, especially with the new kickoff rules and everything.
Yep,
I think
absolutely.
that played a big part into it as well. He gives, you like everything we talked about that could be kind of cause him to struggle maybe a little bit on base downs on defense, or things that you love on special teams, that chaotic energy, that hit, that point and shoot ability. That's exactly what you want in a special teamer. And I think he's really going to thrive there. And, the Cowboys, we don't talk about it, but the Cowboys lost arguably their best special teamer in Dorrance Armstrong.
He might be the best special teamer in the league, to be honest with you.
In free agency.
Yeah.
And, he obviously the size types, the body types are a little bit different. So they're going to be doing different roles. But I think Liufau can be that kind of special team ace for the Cowboys,
Yeah, and the ability to penetrate from the first level, even if you're not down, the ability to penetrate translates to punt block, to field goal block, and we know Bones likes to draw these things up and get after guys. So I love that point there about him in special teams, because that's linebackers, tight ends, fullbacks. That's like 80 to 90% of your special team snaps go to those guys. And then the rest of it is gunners and offensive linemen and return guys. That's really what it becomes. So it's a great point on Marist Liufau on the special teams. Then we go to all the way down to the 5th round. We wait almost 100 picks. It felt like 3 days waiting through day 3 to get to the Cowboys' 5th round pick at number 174 overall. And the Cowboys take Caelen Carson, who is a corner from Wake Forest. Do you have a take on Caelen Carson? Or I think it was interesting that I always thought there was a chance they would try to add to the DB room, especially because so many of the guys that are depth in the DB room are like real pure Dan Quinn kind of big, long, not super, I'll use funny word, not super turny, like, kind of straight line, long-legged, high-cut guys. And so I always thought there was a chance they would try to add some depth. What's your take on Carson in the 5th round at 174 overall?
No, I haven't watched much. I didn't watch any of Carson before the draft. I heard about him as someone who we needed to watch, but I was just never able to get to him. And I've only been able to watch a very, very small amount since the draft, but I see the vision. And I was somebody before the draft who was talking about how DB was, or cornerback specifically, I wasn't someone who thought that they should invest in the safety position, but I definitely thought cornerback was a position that they should think about investing in, especially with Stephon Gilmore not on the team right now, or who knows if he's even going to get re-signed at all. So I understand why they did. And I think he's interesting. He got his hands on a lot of balls, didn't turn them into a lot of interceptions, but I loved his quote about why he wasn't able to turn them into interceptions, because it's something that's not thought about a lot for evaluation. It's something that evaluators from the outside, we can't know, but he was talking about the mindset, about how, he used to play receiver. So he says he has good hands, but his just mindset was to knock balls down. And we know once he gets with Al Harris with the Cowboys that they're going to be talking about, plucking those balls out, pass deflections aren't enough. This defense, this secondary specifically, likes to take balls away, and I think that's going to be great for him to change that mindset. But one thing that kind of gave me some PTSD flashbacks is he has some of that Chidobe Awuzie to his game, where he'll have phenomenal coverage for 95% of the play, and then he just won't turn around his head, and then the ball will just come in right over his head, and it'll be plucked for a catch. And if he can't get that initial stab where he's playing through the hands, then he's going to struggle. So it makes sense. So, yeah, sorry, continue.
No, go ahead. I thought you were done there. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, so it makes sense why a guy with Zimmer would like him, because obviously we saw when Chidobe Awuzie left the Cowboys, he went to a Zimmer disciple and Paul Guenther over in Cincinnati with Chidobe went to Cincinnati with Paul Guenther, and he had probably some of his best years of his career before he had, I think it was a torn Achilles or another torn ACL. One of the two, he had another big injury, but he was playing at a very, very, very high level with the Bengals before then. And I think Caelen Carson is kind of that very similar type of corner as a Chidobe Awuzie.
Yeah, and Gunther's with the Cowboys now, I believe.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, he's
makes a lot of sense.
Defense assistant, aka the real linebackers coach.
Yeah, exactly, the linebackers coach. So we can keep calling.
One question, one aside. What is Scott McCurley doing for Mike McCarthy? Like, is he Mike McCarthy's like brother-in-law or something? Or are they related somehow?
He's got to be something, because he was with him in Green Bay and then didn't have a job the year he was out, the year that Mike was out of the league. And then as soon as
back in, but the thing is, he has these great titles, like he's the linebacker coach. But when George Edwards was here, everybody says that George Edwards was the actual linebackers coach.
And then the same thing with Paul Guenther.
Last year, they get rid of George Edwards, so McCurley's kind of off on his own. And then what happens? Linebackers don't really perform very well. We don't really see much development, which is even scarier than the lack of production from the group. And then now we bring up Paul Guenther back, and he's still the linebacker coach. There's still the person, when we're talking to the linebacker coach, he's going to have the dominion over the second level defenders on the Cowboys defense. But then when you talk to anybody associated, like, yeah, it's Paul Guenther, though. It's really Paul Guenther. So it's just like, what? It's like the weirdest thing ever to me.
Yeah, but it's Scott McCurley, Pennsylvania guy, Pittsburgh guy, played at Pitt, and then joined the Packers in 2006, which I believe was Mike McCarthy's first year with the Packers.
Why can't none of my friends become a head coach or something?
Right. Joined the Packers in 2006 when Mike McCarthy was the head coach and was like a coaching assistant administrator type person. And then, was an intern in 2006, then a coaching administrator in 2007, and then became a linebackers coach in 2009, and then was promoted from inside linebackers coach to just linebackers coach after Kevin Green left. So, yeah, been with Mike McCarthy a long time, even though he's always had, a Kevin Green, a Winston Moss, a George Edwards, a Paul Guenther guy to oversee him. I don't know what Scott McCurley, how Scott McCurley knows Mike McCarthy, but there's something that goes way back to Pittsburgh there that's kept him employed for a long time.
It's kind of funny. Me and my wife always have like a kind of like a joke back and forth that we talk about our friends. It's like, because her friends, she has one friend who was like who worked for a Supreme Court justice, was like their little, I forget what the word is, but whatever, you work under the Supreme Court justice. She has another one who's like a legitimate rocket scientist. She has another one who's like who's a CEO of a startup like environmental tech firm. She has all these like super duper impressive friends. And then my friends, I'm like, yeah, my buddy Jim works at Starbucks. My buddy Craig works at the Best Buy. That's not the real. I don't want to out them for this shit. But my friends are working at all these like super non-impressive jobs, and we just laugh about like the different dichotomies. I'm like, I need a Mike McCarthy in my life. What was
there? You go,
the right friends.
Exactly. You need a Mike McCarthy. I mean, you work at PFF, man. He's BFS with all those guys over there. So there you go.
You're all the time, right?
There you go, for a whole year, right? Coming from the barn back and forth. All right, so
every snap, every single one.
All of them, every snap. Yeah, but one of the things that's interesting, we talked a little bit about special teams. One of the things that's interesting about the Cowboys coming into this year is Jalen Tolbert was one of their primary gunners, special teams players, outside on punt return, along with Sam Williams once C.J. Goodwin got hurt. That was an experiment.
That was an experiment that seemed great when they didn't run the ball back. You're like, oh, look at this 260-pound guy be the first one down. But the second they started returning it and realizing that he has no ability to hit the brakes, they were like, oh, it's the smartest thing.
Yeah, he's going to run right by us if we don't fair catch it. So let's just not fair catch it. But yeah, so with Jalen Tolbert, and right now it looks like he's going to have a pretty significantly elevated role in the Cowboys offense this year, which means that there's a pretty good chance he's not going to be out there playing 200, 250 special team snaps this year. You see a guy like Caelen Carson, who 83.4 run defense grade, one of the highest percentiles in the class for run defense among a corner. I like to use that as a proxy for physicality along the defensive or in the secondary. 6 foot 195, gonna be the kind of guy who is able to contribute as one of those gunners on special teams. A little bit less on kickoff return now because of the new rules, but another guy in that part of the draft that is going to be able to contribute on teams. Then we get into the next pick. I'm really interested in this guy. This might be like my, day 3 guy here in this draft. And that's Ryan Flournoy, who is a wide receiver from SEMU, Southeast Missouri State University, was at the Senior Bowl. He is, according to the relative athletic score, the most athletic player in the Cowboys draft class. You can see the comparison here. And we talked a lot coming into this conversation about what a freak athlete Tyler Guyton was for a player at his position. Same thing for Cooper Beebe and Marshon Kneeland. And Ryan Flournoy is one of the best measured athletes in the entire draft class coming into the draft. And so he's really interesting to me because one of the things that I saw is it's hard to get SEMU tape, right? But I was able to see him play against Kansas State. And he's a guy who you would think a guy like him goes to SEMU and pretty clearly the best athlete on the field in most of those situations. But he's out there doing dirty work as a wide receiver at, just over 6 foot, about 200 pounds. He's out there getting after it as a blocker, leading on screens and things like that. And then you see him throw him the ball, catch the ball away from his body, go up and make plays, come back to the ball on comebacks and things like that. And he's a really interesting wide receiver in a wide receiver room that has it feels like a lot of opportunity at the back end of the depth chart for somebody like him to come in. And one of the things they talked about on the call when they talked to him on the draft cam was they talked about the coaches were excited because he's so good with the ball in his hands. And so really great athlete, good with the ball in his hands, not afraid to do dirty work. Like that's the kind of guy who winds up on a roster whenever we get to September. And so I'm excited about Ryan Flournoy coming into the draft.
Yeah, and I haven't watched much Flournoy tape. I'll tell you that from the beginning. Not really.
I don't think very many people have. We're not Dane Brugler here.
Yeah, but the thing I like about it though is when you're picking a receiver late in the draft specifically, I really like attacking the smaller school receivers better because they usually were the number 1 target and got the lion's share of their receiving targets from their offense. So they know what it's like to be a top weapon to get defense's attention on them. They know, you see them being able to win even though it's against a smaller school competition. I just think that lends itself better if you're taking that's what these are. As we said at the beginning, the draft is only 4 rounds long. So once we get to these day 3 picks, you're kind of just taking shots at the dark. They're lotto tickets. And I think taking a chance on a very highly productive and athletic player from a small school is the route to go rather than maybe a big school guy who's less athletic and less productive.
Yeah, it's one of those where there's a point of return where it becomes that way, where you see somebody like Terry McLaurin, right, who goes to Ohio State and winds up buried on the depth chart there, but is a freak athlete, goes to the Senior Bowl, performs really well, and you're like, hey, maybe this guy can play. That's the guy to take a shot on there. But the guy who, like you said, isn't the great tested athlete and is buried on the depth chart because he's not a great tested athlete, that's where it becomes sketchy. Take of those big school guys, and you want to look to the small school guys who, like you said, they're not scared to go out there and be the first target, the first read on a read, and have to take on the best corner from the opposition. Maybe he's not as good as the corners, the best corner at Ohio State, but he may be. We saw a guy from, a lower level school, a corner, get picked, in the first corner off the board this year was a number one corner from a smaller school. So they've got corners at those lower levels that can play. And when you're playing against the number one guy all the time, and you're getting the lion's share of the targets, and you are kind of the guy that your team counts on to make big plays, that does definitely mean something, especially when you get to these points where you come into a game unexpectedly and you have to be a guy who makes a big catch in a big moment. And you see him, contested catches. I think a lot of people overrate contested catches a lot of times in terms of go up and make the big jump ball play down the field. But I think there's contested catches underneath as a slant player and things like that you see him run. And we know, we'll talk about this coming up over the course of the next few months, I'm sure. And as we get in the season, Mike McCarthy still loves himself some slant routes. Like, that did not go away in the 4 or 5 years he was not calling plays. So they're going to run them some slants. Yes, they're going to run them some slants in this offense, especially in training camp in the preseason when they're running like base day one install stuff with these third teamers late in the second half of these games. He's going to have the opportunity to run some slants, and you see him go out and pluck some some poorly thrown slants at Simu, because unfortunately, the downside of those small school wide receivers is the quarterback play at a lot of those small schools can be rough. So Ryan Flournoy, that might be my guy on day 3 that I'm kind of looking to. We all wind up with our pet cats going into training camp. Ryan may be my guy coming into to training camp as you and Landon and those guys are sitting in Oxnard watching these guys. I'm going to be paying attention to what you guys say about him in one-on-ones.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. And like I was saying before, the Cowboys have had a lot of success with these kind of smaller school productive players. I mean, with the Miles Austins, the Sam Hurd, Cole Beasley, all these guys that were from smaller schools, but they performed well. Like Cole Beasley didn't perform well in all the athletic testing, but he jumped really well and he ran the shuttles extremely well. And Miles Austin was extremely athletic. Sam Hurd was super productive at the small school coming out of college. So I think this kind of framework of a player kind of works. And I think the Cowboys have had success. And I think he's someone who can end up being a steal for the Cowboys in the 5th round. And, a steal, we're talking about a guy that develops into like a number 4, good, solid number 4 receiver, or maybe he can vie for Jalen Tolbert to get some number 3 snaps eventually. Like, that's what we're talking about by someone who would be a hit at this point in the draft. We're not expecting him to be a number 2 or a number 1 anytime ever. We're expecting him to hopefully turn into a number 3 or number 4 eventually.
Yeah, if he becomes like a little bit higher end Noah Brown for what he was for most of his career.
Where Houston he's like Texans Noah Brown.
Yes, absolutely. Where, kind of dirty work guy, 3rd, 4th option in the passing game, and contribute on special teams. Like, that's a massive hit for a guy with the 174th pick in the draft. And then we get even deeper into the draft, and we get to their 233rd overall pick. And Flournoy wasn't even the 174th pick. That was Caelen Carson. We're talking about 216 with Flournoy. The 233rd overall pick is Nathan Thomas, the offensive tackle, the left tackle for the Ragin' Cajuns, what used to be the University of Louisiana Lafayette, but is now just University of Louisiana. And did you have a chance to watch Nathan Thomas coming in because of all the offensive line interest? Or is this a guy who who we had to catch up on as we got further into the process.
I didn't see him beforehand, but I have actually watched a good amount of him since the draft because I'm just always intrigued by the trench guys the most.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, when you're talking about you're taking a guy at, like you said, pick number 233 in the 7th round, I expected the tape to be awful, to be like, yawning throughout of it. And it was actually like not bad. There's a lot of things in the tape that I thought you could take away and see as someone who can turn into a viable, backup rotational type of Joe Looney type in the NFL. I think he's definitely, from a physical point of view, he's like a lot of the things you want. Obviously, I don't think he's going to be a tackle in the NFL. Yeah. I don't think he has the range. I don't think he has the footwork. I don't think he works as well in space. But you see the things like when he quick sets someone, you see kind of the guard skill set. You see kind of the menacing power. You see a lot of the traits that you want in a guard prospect. And I think the main thing that I want to see with him is he plays a little bit too upright right now. He plays a little bit high with his pad level, and that's going to, especially on the interior, going to cause him to have issues with stronger interior defenders who are going to uproot him out of his stance and be able to put him on skates. But he's already has really good functional strength, and if he can just, clean up his technique, sit down a little bit more in his when he's receiving contact and those type of things. I think he's someone, like I said, he can develop into a Joe Looney-esque type, who can be, the guard, center guard kind of backup for all three.
Yeah, I think I'm showing the comparables, call them stable metrics, whatever you want to call them, from your folks at PFF, our folks at PFF for Nathan Thomas. And you can see the illustration of what you're talking about. And this, I love looking at stuff like this as a total picture. And PFF is such a great resource for this reason, right? So you can see every snap that he took in his college career was at left tackle. And now when you're at Louisiana Lafayette and you are a draftable offensive lineman, you're going to play left tackle. That's just the way it works, regardless of, if you have the movement capabilities and all that kind of stuff to really play left tackle at a high level. And you can see the run block grades in comparison to his peers at the offensive tackle position, zone and gap and overall at the upper end of the class. Like one of the best run blocking offensive linemen in the draft. And to be fair to him, a relatively high offensive line or pass block grade as well. But then one of the things that PFF does that's awesome is the true pass set pass block grade. And so that lets you see, like, you take out all the screen plays, the RPO plays, the play action, all that kind of stuff, and you get to a true, like, I'm going to take a pass set and I'm going to block this guy across from me type of situation. And that's where you see the grades start to suffer a little bit. And when you take that into account, you put those two things together and you go, man, if you put this guy in a phone booth and you say, all right, you're going to play guard and you just have to block, you just got to move people in the run game and you've got to hold up on the inside in this tight area where your lack of movement ability isn't quite so pronounced, and where the ability to sit down on guys and the ability to use power can step up. And again, 334 pounds is what PFF has him at. Yeah, he's a huge guy. This feels like a guard. This feels like, the school's a little smaller and the competition is a little different. But you talked about all the really good undrafted free agents are going to get scooped up. This feels like a guy in another draft class that is an undrafted free agent that we spend a week talking about how he's the undrafted free agent we're the most excited to see play because we think he's a college tackle who translates inside.
He's kind of like our why am I blanking on his name, from Oregon last year? Who
I was going to say TJ Bass, the little bit smaller school than TJ Bass, but the same exact profile. You just use the 7th round pick on him instead of getting him in as an undrafted free agent because of the state of the class and because maybe you were getting the impression that because the class was smaller, the competition for him as an undrafted free agent was going to be a lot higher. And so let's go ahead and draft him and take him, with a 233rd pick or whatever it was. So a guy to definitely be interested to watch as he makes that transition. The Cowboys right now are really rebuilding the entire depth of their offensive line at this point. And with the two guys at the top of the depth chart they added at the top of the draft, it feels like they're in a pretty good spot. But one of the things we've seen over the course of the last few years, you could just never have enough of these guys. And if this is another guy that they can turn into a guy who can walk in and be capable of playing either guard spot in a pinch, maybe, now you're looking at a really, really good interior situation with him and TJ Bass and Brock Hoffman as depth, with the three guys that are the starters and Tyler Cooper and Zach. That's six. If this pans out with Nathan Thomas, that's six pretty good options at the interior offensive line that you could be looking at.
And one thing that's being made for certain is the Cowboys are adding beef to their offensive line. They're not getting these Tyler Linderbaum, these smaller movement type of guys. They're trying to get these guys that can vertically displace interior defenders out of there. And I think a lot of it is to try to help the run game, to give the running backs a bigger runway so that they can make plays.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also a type thing for the offensive line coach versus, the type of guys that they, because really from, 2013-ish, or really even before that, because Bill Callahan was the offensive line coach before he was calling plays. So like 2011-ish, they were in this kind of Bill Callahan, we're going to move people around. And then they went to Frank Pollock, which is even more of like a true zone. We're going to move back, we're going to be really laterally dynamic with our offensive line.
Colombo was very similar too.
I was about to say, then Colombo was the same kind of guy. Paul Alexander was a little bit of a different experiment, but that, didn't last very long. And then you get into, Philbin has kind of been the same way. Always take these smaller tackle guys, play them at guard, play them at center. And so now you get into this Solari world, and these guys they're big and they're beefy, and it's going to be cool to watch a little bit of a different style of offensive line that the Cowboys are going to have versus what they had kind of in the last iteration of their really good offensive line. If it rolls through and shows up again as another really good group, then they're going to have, it's going to be of a different style for sure. And it's going to,
it almost seems like once they drafted Tyler Smith and they saw kind of like how well that went, they were like, you know what, we need to double down on this archetype of offensive linemen, these vertical displacers, these violent players, these players that are going to create movement in the running game. Maybe they're not as fleet of foot in pass protection, especially on the interior, but they are violent. They bring the fight to opposing defenses. And I think that's a welcome change for me just for watching. One thing that I used to always get annoyed with when watching the Cowboys offensive line in the past, they were always so good, but we were never like the finisher types. You would watch like the Kelechi Osemele's and you see them burying defenders constantly, any chance they got. And as good as Tyron Smith and Zach Martin are, that's not something that they really do. They're not really violent finishers. They're kind of just like, I'm going to do my job. I'm going to do it really good. I'm going to be consistent with it, but I'm not going to, make your life a living hell every single second type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that is kind of a little bit of the attitude shift that's happened. Then we get to the last pick, and we may only get to this. We're going to have to do this on a slow burn. We got a lot of time to burn between now and the start of the season.
Yeah.
So we'll get to the undrafted free agents probably later this week. But the last pick for the Cowboys in the draft is Justin Rogers, defensive tackle from Auburn. And we've talked about how the Cowboys don't have any interior defensive line depth. This is a big boy. The interior of the defensive line for the Cowboys. PFF lists him at 6'3", 346. I don't have the combine profile or anything up for him, but he is. We'll show the RAS score here in just a second. The red line down there at the bottom is Justin Rogers, the defensive tackle from Auburn. By far the worst athlete in the class for the Cowboys, and one of the worst, tested athletes.
I didn't know that they had RAS scales that went that low.
Yeah, it's pretty bad down there. But to be clear, athleticism is not Justin Rogers' game whatsoever. Did you have a chance to? I know you like the trench guys. What was your thought on Justin Rogers into and out of the pick?
Honestly, this pick kind of reminded me of, I don't know if you remember Ken Bishop in like 2014 from Northern Illinois, how he was another like 7th round nose tackle. And I just think doesn't really move the needle. He's not someone I could see him making the roster just because of the Cowboys' lack of depth. He only has to beat out like a Carl Davis, which, as we saw when Carl Davis played last year, he is not very good.
Yeah.
So his ability to win there, he's fine taking on base blocks and stuff because of his pure size, but you just don't see him getting off blocks at all. You don't see him being able to stay connected with his. If he's going to be playing nose, they're going to have to be playing a lot of lag technique versus those zone runs where he sticks on the backside of the A gap instead of playing front side, because he just does not have the movement skills to stay connected to a front side gap against zone runs.
Yep.
And that was a big issue at Auburn that you saw, and I think it would be a big issue in the NFL if he doesn't get either his technique or maybe drop a little bit of weight, not a Mozzie amount of weight, maybe a little bit of weight just to get a little bit better lateral athleticism. But this one didn't really move the needle much for me. I don't really think he's someone who's going to make much of an impact either way. I don't think he's destined for a long stint on the Cowboys or anything. I just kind of think he's just, super replaceable, big nose tackle type that.
Yeah, he's a 345-pound nose tackle that you got in the 7th round of the draft. Like 345-pound humans who can move and make plays do not last until the 7th round of the draft. And so he takes up space on the inside, and every once in a while you will see there's a little bit of like short area lateral burst that you'll see every once in a while when he gets the chance, when they slant the defensive line one way or another. And like you said, he's not getting off blocks very often, but every once in a while you'll see him get to move. He'll start head up, and instead of playing head up where he's going to get blocked, he may not move, but he's going to get blocked. If they slant him into one of the A gaps, every once in a while he can get there just before the center does.
It's almost like he catches them by surprise,
yes,
right?
Exactly.
They're not expecting it. Like, this big slow effort isn't gonna slant into my A gap. There's no way.
Exactly.
Like,
they're so used to him playing down the middle and just being able to, if I bring power with me, I'll be able to hold him where I need to hold him or move him where I need to put him. And so they get ready to bring that power on the snap. And if he slides one gap over off of dead center, every once in a while he can get that shoulder clear and he'll be in the backfield. Now he'll miss some tackles in the backfield because running backs are better athletes than him, but he can create some commotion, which is kind of what you want out of these defensive tackles. Is hold up against their blocks, but also but create some chaos when they get the chance. And that's really about it. He's a 244th overall pick defensive tackle that, he's going to have to. I mean, like you said, he may make the Cowboys roster this year just because they don't have anybody to play this type of spot. But there's also the chance that, we'll get into this later on too. Maybe they'll do it before we get the chance to talk about it. Is they're almost certainly going to go out and get one of these kind of mercenary veteran interior defensive linemen.
Calais Campbell, where you
Calais Campbell, Linval Joseph is out there, has a connection to Zimmer and Gunther. Like there are guys out there in interior defensive line that have played at the NFL level and have done it at a high level that we can, keep our fingers crossed and hope that they make that type of move that won't be super expensive. They could even do it in training camp and be okay if they don't want to take snaps away from Mozzie's development or something like that. But guys, we're a little bit over the hour here, so we're going to get out of here. Thanks so much for joining us. We're glad to have you guys. We're on, show 4 here, and we're really excited to take this journey. Through the offseason, we're going to get into some we'll get into some scheme stuff and some tape stuff and things like that as we get through the offseason, as we're hunting for things to talk about and do. And then I'm really excited to get to training camp and get through that period and get into the season and watch this team, see what this team can do as we get into the year. So that is the Cowboys lunch hour, or not Cowboys lunch hour, the Blue Star lunch hour. And we will see you guys next time.